So UFC Fight Night Vegas, Onama versus Garcia took place this weekend. And right now I'm just about to go over the results, give my reactions, recap the whole event. Let's get into it. Overall, this was a pretty decent fight card. However, you're right, with things being at the apex, it always makes things feel a little bit lackluster a bit. I feel like it takes off a little bit of the steam of the fights. The crowd wasn't as loud as it would be. It looked a bit empty. It was a bit distracting that even my fiance, who was watching the fights, was talking about how everything felt a bit flat, even though a lot of the performance were actually pretty decent. But let's start out with the fight opener of Talida Alenkar versus Ariane Carnelosi. I'm not gonna lie to y'all, my picks were a bit cooked on this one. On the prelims, I think I went around 50-50, but then when it got to the main card, my picks were kind of chopped. If the past few fights have been a theme of the underdogs, then this one was definitely kind of the favorites, showing why they're the favorites. But once again, to get back into it, we are telling to Alenkar, who ended up winning this one. I think that honestly, I expected Carnelosi to win. I expected her striking to kind of make up a bit for things. I didn't really expect there to be like this noticeable of a gap in the grappling, but Alenkar basically kept pushing the pace. She was able to really constantly keep things as a threat, even when she was getting overwhelmed. Like the whole 3 rounds kind of went similarly. It would start off with Carnelosi is pushing the pace, pushing the aggression, kind of trying to find that good landing strikes, land the good combos. Then Alenkar would kind of create an opening and then initiate submissions and submission attempts, initiate that grappling, and just get domination that way. And that's basically what she did to get the finish. Carnelosi wasn't really able to even properly defend against any of the submission attempts, and then in the round 3, she kind of got cracked a little bit, got stumbled, but then you got Alenkar who went in and really like sealed the deal with that submission. So great job to Alenkar, but Carnelosi's team definitely have a pretty glaring gap that they'd probably want to focus on a bit. Moving on to the next fight. This fight more or less kind of showed my worries a bit. Like if you watch my pre-fight predictions, you saw that I mentioned that even though I was picking Phil Rowe, he has a tendency to like be a bit slow, start a bit slow, like, and you really saw that, especially against Young Ho, who was really pushing that wrestling initiative. He was constantly in his face, very aggressive, constantly trying to have dominant position. Even if he didn't have any submission attempts, he definitely kept going for the ground and pound. And Phil Rowe, like he was trying to be a martial artist in a fight. He was trying to take his time, posture, like find his range, get his tempo, and Seong Yong Kyo didn't allow any of that. He just kept going forward, immediately found grappling, found the wrestling. The moment Phil Rowe even attempted to build up a little bit of momentum or even attempted to try to be comfortable, Seong Yong Kyo would be in his face, be very annoying. Then when Phil Rowe even forgot for a millisecond about the wrestling, boom, take him down, shift the position. Phil Rowe would attempt to utilize his jiu-jitsu, but Seong Yong Kyo was just very heavy with that wrestling posture, kind of trying to smother him, kind of trying to just wear on him, and it just basically prevent him from doing anything. Even in that last round, where right at the end, where the fight's over, we all know that, well, the fight's basically over. We all know that Phil Rowe was already down all 3 rounds, but he's trying to create an opening, trying to literally like the last 20 seconds, he's trying to force the escape from the grappling to try to make something to happen. Seong Yong Kyo didn't even allow him to have that. He kept being in his face, kept him in the clinch, kept him trying to grapple him, and he was really just pressure fighting. So definitely once again, it's like Phil has to start a lot sooner. And for him, it's like it's not even just the grappling, the wrestling specifically could probably use some improvement, or more so his get-ups. But even more than that, I think his biggest problems, or at least one of his biggest problems, really and truly is his slow start. He needs too much time to find his pace sometimes. You really gonna see that when we get to the main event, when we get and discuss that one. But you're gonna really see some of the differences in what a slow start versus somebody who's a fast pacer and fast paced starter can really do. Somebody who does that really well and really demonstrate this a lot is Fluffy Hernandez, who always starts in people's faces, starts high energy, starts immediately kind of trying to force his game plan. And you see that wither a lot of people and break a lot of people over time. And a lot of people just aren't really ready to like immediately begin with that level of pace. A lot of people need a little time to warm up a bit, and you really see how that can overwhelm certain fighters. Moving on to the next one, we have Alice Ardoline versus Montserrat Conijo Ruiz. Once again, I got cooked for them first three picks. Alice Ardoline won this one. I thought Montserrat Conijo would have kind of been able to find her range despite the length and height differences. I thought Conijo would have been able to kind of breach the gaps, get in Clyde Tinch, then get in for the infighting. Wouldn't have given Arlene the level of space that she kind of had for the majority of this fight, and kind of force fully like kind of stifle a lot of Arlene's offensive by just kind of being in. I don't know if y'all have ever either been the taller fighter against a good short fighter, or been the shorter fighter against a taller fighter. But a lot of times when you're actually in those gaps, you're actually in their face and kind of in your range rather than their range. You kind of end up stifling a lot of their striking or their offensive. Kind of makes it difficult for a lot of people who aren't as adept to utilizing all of your weapons and tools from actually fully extending and taking advantage. You kind of cut off a lot of their space by being too close, so to speak. But Ardeline kind of prevented that. She maintained her range and distance very well this whole fight. She was very clearly the more technical striker in this matchup. She was more aware. She was kind of busting up Montserrat a bit more from the outside or from her range. She got in when she needed to, but she really kind of just was the better person when it came to the range game, when it came to the striking game, when it came to the timing. She kind of was just a bit better than her everywhere in this matchup. Um, Moving on to the next one. Now we get into where I start getting some picks right. We have Norma Dumont versus Ketlin Vieira. As I said in my prediction, I just kind of thought that Norma Dumont was a bit better everywhere. Even though it ended in a split decision, I personally thought that it was pretty clear that Norma Dumont was the winner of this one. Norma Dumont was more aggressive. She was more, her striking looked cleaner to me, cleaner and sharper. It looked, I land more, it overall, even when you look at this total strike differential, like Dumont had 87 to Vieira's 58. Yeah, and yeah, Vieira had the two takedowns, but she didn't really actually utilize them. And Dumont really was able to like emphasize her get-ups. There was one submit. Vieira got credited for one submission attempt, but once again, it's like Dumont didn't really make that count. When you look at the significant strikes, you see what I meant when I say the difference between her aggression and her effectiveness. Dumont was the much more aggressive fighter. She was much more effective with her striking. She was really putting more pressure on Vera throughout the fight for these three rounds. So even though this ended in a split decision, I think that it was. And Dumont's kind of been on a split decision victory run right now. But I think it was pretty clear that Dumont was the winner of this one. As I said, I think even as I said, and as she demonstrated in the fight, in my opinion, she was kind of just better everywhere. Our next fight, we had Dante Johnson versus Cedricus Dumas. This one, as I said before, when I did my prediction, Dumas is a fighter that has good potential. He just had a lot of out of the cage issues. I feel like he could have just focused on MMA a little bit more. But overall, in this fight, I think this was a pretty fun fight. I wouldn't say it's the craziest fight on a technical level, but you definitely saw the difference in experience between the two. Even though Dumas was the one who lost and Dante Johnson was my pick that I got correct, but the way how Dumas did it, Dumas was honestly kind of it showed a bit of a highlight in some of the weaknesses in Johnson. It's his longest fight he's had so far. Um, he ended up. It was also his first submission versus him usually getting first round knockouts. But Dumas was able to kind of play that range game a little bit more, bring in the grappling a little bit more. Kind of gave Dante Johnson a lot more to think about. You really saw a lot of Dumas's experiences as well, kind of knowing when to slow down the fight a bit. Like you also saw some of his gaps where he kind of got caught with that submission at the end. I feel as if a higher level fighter, especially in the current middleweight division, would have been a lot more capable of resisting that and countering it. But that goes to show that Dante Johnson struggled a bit to get this one. Yeah, he faced some adversity. He was able to overcome it. But as Johnson's own corner said, Dumas kind of turned Johnson into a wrestler. Dumas dictated the pace of the fight. Dumas, for the most part, Dumas was the one dictating the pace of the fight. Dumas was the one who was really controlling it. In my opinion, Dumas won the first round. So even then, I feel like Johnson kind of just overwhelmed Dumas as far as tired him out. But as far as the technical aspect of it, even though Dumas looked a bit unique in how he was doing a lot of it, I think he was the one who had the better game plan. I think he was the one who was being more effective until literally he kind of just had openings, which are more so a fundamental issue with his actual training and skills currently overall. But within the grand scheme of the middleweight division, I think Dante Johnson definitely has a lot more to prove before we really, at the very least, against another more experienced, well-rounded fighter, before we even start properly considering him as an effective contender more than he is. I'd say I'd say give him somebody that really challenges him a bit more in the middleweight division. Then we'll see if he's capable of getting that good ranked opponent in the top 15 before we start properly considering that. But still, congrats to them. Congrats to him. Moving on. We have Timmy Kumba versus Chang Ho Lee. This fight was pretty interesting to see. Uh, in the beginning, because in the beginning, Chang Ho Lee was the one who who was pushing the grappling offensive. He's the one who kind of spent the majority, if not the entirety, of the first round on Kumba's back. I remember, in the words of our fiance, back rider. Yeah, and I can imagine a lot of people are probably frustrated by that initial first round. It felt a bit like a stalling tactic because not much happened outside of Chang Ho Lee kind of preventing motion from happening. However, However, when you look at, as you can tell by the total strikes, Chang Ho Lee was still pushing an offensive. I just think Kumba was a lot more effective with with his offensive. Like once in that first round, after Chang Ho Lee had that dominant grappling showing, Kumba showed his own grit a lot and his own grappling skills. Even ended up taking down Chang Ho Lee himself with more effective posturing and positioning as well. Also, more intentional finishing attempts does. Like so, even when you look at the significant strikes, despite there being such a difference in the total strikes between the two, and on the favor of Chang Ho Lee with 88 to 39, Kumbo is the one who actually is credited with the more significant strikes. So just to show you the difference in effort versus effectiveness, and it feels like Chang Ho Lee was doing a lot to like be the winner, whereas Kumbo was trying to do a lot to actually win the fight. More so, it felt like Chang Ho Lee was kind of trying to do a lot to stall out the decision, so to speak, whereas Kumbo was actually trying to do more so to win the fight itself. He was trying to get those finishes. He was trying to make sure everything was dominant. He was really, really trying to be the dominant person in this showing. And it was very evident and very clear. So I think the judges saw that as well. I think everybody watching the fight for the most part would agree that Kumba was the one who pulled out, who deserved this victory. Moving on to the next fight. So this is another one, my picks that I got right. But I remember Billy Elenka versus Kevin Christian. I know I made a little joke about Kevin Christian's body. I know I'm not one to talk, but still. But I made a little joke about Kevin Christian's body type. But Billy Elenka, you really saw in this one, it was interesting. It was short, was very short, but it kind of felt like Kevin Christian was the one who was doing much better with the distance management. Like, felt like he was being a little bit more effective until he just got found. Like, Billy Elenka just managed to find him, hit him with some shots that really stumbled him, got him down, was really trying till the moment he was really trying to finish that fight, sunk in that choke, got the submission, got the tap. But in this aspect, the ref didn't see it because he was literally on the other side of the hand that was tapping, and Kevin Christian unnecessarily got put to sleep. I'm not quite sure how to feel about that in the aspect that I, I don't feel personally, I'm not blaming the ref. You didn't see, you didn't see. Like, but it's also very interesting to be like, okay, then you're supposed to be watching the fight where you're supposed to be protecting these fighters, and in this position where long after a fighter had already given up and was tapping, he unnecessarily got put to sleep, got oxygen cut off from his brain, and unnecessarily get put in a compromising and now an additional health risk than what was necessary. So I definitely think that that should definitely be notified. And I think that at least a conversation should be had with the ref in aspect of this off screen, but I don't think it was egregious enough to be like off with his head type thing. But I also had a funny moment from Billy Alenka when you telling the ref that, yeah, every time when you're the one who's refing me, I always do great. So that was pretty fun to see. But overall, I don't have too much for this one because, as I said, it's kind of like it felt like Alenka was the one who was losing until he caught him, and then fully went into getting those finishing instincts fully tapped in, and then he managed to land that choke. This is light heavyweight. There's a lot of killers at light heavyweight, so it'd be interesting to see how Alenka kind of does against the other competition that is a bit more aggressive than Kevin Christian was. Kevin Christian was actually, even though I felt like he was the one who was landing a lot more, because don't let these total strikes fool you. A lot of these are based after Christian got dropped, but even the significant strikes, like Christian landed 0 significant strikes after he got dropped, obviously. So to even show that they were this close with 17-14 shows you that Christian kind of was the one who was winning that fight until he got caught. So I want to see how Elenka does against the other members of light heavyweight that do hit harder, as hard as he does, that are more aggressive, that do have better footwork. I'd like to see those matchups a bit more. So I want to keep an eye out on Elenka to see like how he does in the future. Starting out, starting out the main card. Starting out the main card, we have Alan Nascimento versus Cody Durden. The main card is kind of where my picks go from 50-50 to like completely cooked. However, Cody Durden was my pick. Not gonna lie, I thought he was doing well in the fight until he wasn't. Durden, I expected, even though I know Durden's been on a bit of a losing streak, but I expected him to win because he's an aggressive fighter. I think he had more effective striking. I think that he had enough grappling wherewithal and defense to like kind of not get overwhelmed by Nascimento, even though Nascimento is kind of under that shoot the box, do Bronx tutelage right now. But and I feel like we were seeing that. I feel like we saw Durden win that first round, primarily with being the more aggressive fighter, landing more strikes. I think there were a couple times Durden actually could have stumbled him. Nash got to give credit to Nascimento's chin because a lot of those shots landed properly. I think Nascimento was kind of getting battered on the feet a bit, but I feel like he still was still in it with grit, but with grit, he was still in it. But Nascimento was still on the losing end for the majority of the striking exchanges in this, as we can see from the total strikes and even the significant strikes being overwhelmingly in the favor of, or being primarily in the favor of Cody Durden. However, you really saw those gaps come in once it became, really saw those gaps come in whenever there was a grappling exchange, which me personally in that first round, when Durden was able to knock Nascimento down, I honestly think that it was a poor decision to not kind of follow him down or try to get some ground and pound. I think a lot of these fighters doubt their own grappling skills too much to even land effective ground and pound, and I feel like sometimes it could cost them the win, as I think it could have potentially at least cost Durden a better opportunity in this. They ended up going the second round, and Nascimento, despite being the one who was losing the majority of the grappling exchanges, landed a nice elbow counter on Durden as he was being aggressive. And that's the thing with being aggressive. Sometimes being too aggressive makes you too open and too easily to read and counter. And Durden was trying to push that offensive. Nascimento caught him with a nicely timed counter strike. They dropped him for just 1 second, just half a second. He got dropped. Nascimento immediately jumped right into those submission attempts, sealed it up the choke, and just had him out of there. Durden tried to fight it, but couldn't. That was all she wrote. It was a good scrap while it lasted, and I know that Durden's probably his job is probably in danger right now with his current streak. But in this aspect, I think that was just Nascimento just having a higher fight IQ in the moments where it really counted. Congratulations to him, and moving on to the next one. This one of my picks that did land, good old Charles Radke. I think Radke showed levels in this one. I think Radke, I expected Radke to just kind of be the bit better, a bit everywhere, but primarily so with the striking, I was expecting to see that bigger method, but I think Radke just showed it. Radke was more active. Radke was more effective. Radke was just more overwhelming in this. And Franza was good as well. Franza had good defense. Franza had good wherewithal. We saw with that submission attempt earlier in the fight where Franza was able to get out of that super dangerous situation with the choke. You see in this difference in total strikes, it's 163 to 68, almost 3 times as many strikes. You had the 3 takedowns on the favor of Charles Radke, the 2 submission attempts, which are the one I'm mentioning that Radke attempted earlier that Franza managed to stop, and then the one at the end that actually ended the fight. And then even the significant strike differential, that 31 to 6. Radke was just better. He was just doing more. It felt like he just wanted it more as well. Franzo was really trying, but it just felt as if he just didn't have anything that could have been used to counter. He didn't have anything to offset Radke's weapons. And then after he was tired, and in the third round and close to the end, Radke still hungry for that finish. Didn't win. And that's the difference. You see it when somebody's eyes, when they don't just want to win, they want a domination. And you saw that from Radke. You saw him go for it. You saw him decided that now we're not just going to the judges. Yeah, I know I probably won, but I want to know that I won. And he went in there, fully sealed out. He thought he won, but he wanted to know he won. Went in there, got that choke again, sealed it up, finished the fight. Had Franza tapping, and Franza really tried to fight it too. Gotta respect it. But congratulations to Charles Radke. Moving on to the next fight. We have Isaac Dolgarian versus Yadir Del Val. In my fight in my previous analysis when I mentioned this fight, I'd mentioned how Dolgarian sometimes shows tendencies similar to Phil Rowe in the fact that he kind of overthinks a little bit, kind of has hesitations and stuff that could bridge gaps. Started a bit in the short time that this fight lasted against Edir Del Val. I said it before that on paper, I wanted to kind of go with Del Val because I felt as if skill wise, he probably on paper is the better fighter. But I just, because of the Garrett's power and other things, I just kind of was still leaning towards him a bit. And I didn't want to kind of go against that feeling in this case. But you see the numbers. Del Val had more total strikes, more submission attempts. Bulgarian had a couple gaps in the timing of his striking here and there. Del Val kind of just took advantage of that, kind of sealed the deal where it counted, got him out of there with that submission. Bulgarian real fought it. Bulgarian fought it. He really did. He tried his hardest, but just some a bit of weak technical mistakes, and that just allowed Del Val to kind of sink in the choke a lot tighter. When at the moments when Bulgarian could have fought it and should have focused on fighting the hands a little bit more on how he was fighting them, just a little bit of technical gaps in that area, which ended up getting him choked out. But overall, fun fight for while it lasted. Yeah, Del Val solidifying himself as a prospect in the featherweight division. Bulgarian has to go back to the drawing board, but we move on to the next fight. Here we had Themba Gorimbo versus Jeremiah Wells. I thought Gorimbo's experiences and length would have really shown the advantage in this. I know Wells is a big power puncher and has good rest and good grappling skills, but I thought Gorimbo's experience, his length, and his outfighting would have really got him the victory in this one. And in the first round, it was looking that way. Gorimbo took him down with a pretty minimal effort. Gorimbo was really pushing that pace, pushing that offensive. Gorimbo kind of had him stifled, had him dead rights in the aspect of he didn't really have anything he could have done. And Gorimbo managed to finish that round looking like dominantly winner. But then in the next two rounds, I think Wells kind of took it as a personal challenge where he was like, oh, so we want to wrestle. We want to grapple. Okay, then. And he kind of really pushed that grappling offensive in a much more effective manner. He really kind of slowed down Gorimbo. I think he really made up for a lot of those length, those height and reach disadvantages by having that grappling offensive. I think a lot of those grappling attempts were actually initiated by Gorimbo, but Wells really fully took advantage of it. Versed a lot of them where necessary, showed his dominance, really showed a bit of a gap and difference in those grappling skills, and really used that to kind of dominate the last two rounds and really pull out this decision victory. So congratulations to Jeremiah Wells. I think Themba Gorimbo himself definitely probably needs to either rethink the game plan or stick to the game plan a bit more, because I think he got tired after pushing that strong grappling in the first round. And I think he mentally just couldn't adjust and adapt to, okay, it worked then, it might not work for the rest of the fight. And he kept trying to do the same thing, whereas Wells was the one who actually did manage to adapt and adjust and better. And then he used that to dominate the last two rounds. Moving on to the co-main event. This one, another one, one of the few that I got right in the main card. We got Waldo Cordes Acosta versus Ante Delia. I almost got this one wrong as well. We kind of see it's interesting. This was definitely an interesting main event because we see the eye pokes being an issue, make a resurface, but this time on the part of Tom Aspinall's teammate, Delia. So that just made it even more ironic. It was funny because initially this fight seemed a lot more back and forth. Like you saw, as I'd said in my prediction, Cortez Acosta has really good movement. He's got really good solid skills, especially in the heavyweight division. And yeah, Delia is good as well. But I feel like Delia wasn't ready for Cortez Acosta. I feel as if just specifically he needed at least one more opponent in between before he actually went up to the level of a Cortez Acosta. And I know he trains with Tom Aspinall, but there's a difference between sparring and full-on fighting. I see. So watching Cortez Acosta, I thought that it was his movement versus Delia's like technical boxing, and I think that Cortez Acosta was more so chipping away, winning a little bit more in those meetups, but it was pretty good back and forth, as you can see, even in the counters, like it was 18-18. Like Delia was the one who was walking forward a lot more, but once he got Cortez Acosta against the cage, I know there's a massive weight difference between the two. However, however, despite all of that, it didn't really seem to matter that much with Delia. Like Delia, I know they were saying Delia is undersized for heavyweight, but he was a pretty strong guy. It generally didn't seem like any major factor. However, when he caught Cortez Acosta against the cage, ended up landing a pretty bad eye poke, which kind of stumbled Cortez Acosta. Then Delia went in for the finishing blow, and he threw a finishing combination that ended up having the ref interfere in the fight to stop it because of the eye poke. However, in the way how the ref stopped it, it was misinterpreted to be a finish by Delia. So you can imagine the emotions in that moment to go from, oh, I got him, to, yeah, we won, to, no, continue the fight. That adrenaline dump was probably pretty, pretty crazy. And then also when you look into this fight and how the matchups ended up working, you saw Ante Delia really kind of still wanted to ease into it a little bit more. Once they resumed the fight, Delia kind of was, and don't get me wrong, Delia looked switched on. It kind of reminded me of the moment when Jamal Hill ended up accidentally one-shotting Alex Pereira, and he kind of had that slow down in reaction for half a second. And Cortez Acosta, who was fired up from the eye poke and almost having the fight finish, he kind of just swung big, came out fully aggressive, knocked down Delia, and just went and got the finish really quick and easy. Um, but once again, kind of how the eye poke went, legit. Delia started off the combo with the eye poke, ironically. He actually went for the far side eye, but Costa parried it, and when he parried it, it went into the other eye, got him right here. And then in that moment, Cortez Acosta went to cover the eye, but Delia misinterpreted it, or maybe did interpret it. You never know. Some fighters, what their thoughts may be. But when he went hunched over because of the eye, Delia ended up firing off a combination immediately. And then ref jumped in. The ref didn't wave his hands. The ref didn't wave his hands like how they usually do when the fight's finished. But the way how he jumped in and kind of sectioned it off, it's very easy to see why it would be assumed that that was a fight-ending position. However, though, Cortez Acosta definitely made that count. He had a little funny moment too where ended up calling out Tom Aspinall afterwards. So I don't see him getting that fight, especially since he came off a loss in order to get this one. I'd say give him one more before we seriously start considering him fighting for a championship. But we'll see what they do. You can never predict the UFC sometimes. Moving on to the main event, we have David Onama versus Steve Garcia. I'm going to be honest, guys. This is one of the ones where, like, this is the fight that kind of made me criticize the Apex a bit, because this was a main event fight that didn't feel like a main event to me. You know what I mean? Like, when I watched this fight and the energy I felt, it didn't feel like, yo, this is the main event of the whole card. I'd even argue that some of the fights under it. I'd argue even though Cortez Acosta versus Ante Delia fight felt more like a main event than this one. Like, you felt the energy, you felt the lack of the crowd, you felt it a lot. So it was definitely an interesting feel. But I was disappointed by this fight, guys. And that's primarily because of David Onama. David Onama was my pick, but we all know Steve Garcia's strategy. He's going coming once again. The Fluffy Hernandez comparison, you know he's starting on 10. Shit, he might be starting on 30. You know this is what's going to happen. However, I thought David Onama, I thought he was a better technical fighter. I thought that he would have been able to kind of stifle some of that initial offensive. I think he would have been the reason why I picked this fight by decision, despite knowing that Garcia has been on a hot finish streak and Onama himself has had quite a few finishes. But it's because I thought Garcia would have been aggressive the whole time, being a constant threat. I thought Onama would have been able to parry a lot of things, kind of out technical fight him and end up winning that in the long run. Kind of like we've seen Max Holloway do a couple times against big power punchers. I was expecting Onama to kind of put on that type of performance, like be the better fighter, be more technical. Yeah, he's gonna keep coming, but kind of just outclass him. That did not happen. The fight started. Onama felt super slow, as I was referencing earlier. When it comes to slow starts, Onama felt super slow. He started out, he kind of felt like he constantly was waiting. He felt like he was waiting for Garcia to do something each and every time. He's out, got his hands up, he's only parrying, only barely even countering, barely even covering his face, and Garcia is fully charging at him. Garcia is hitting him with everything, and Garcia is getting more and more hot as the round goes on. Onama is still not doing anything, not much counter shots. Onama, look at this. The total strikes are 43 to 2. 43 to 2. And they're counting both of those two as significant strikes. Because you saw that Garcia's eye got bloodied a little bit by a counter strike, but that was it. It wasn't anything crazy. It wasn't even anything that was that. It just got cut open a little bit. Because some of these guys, with all their training and fight experience, just have a lot more scar tissue and they bleed a little easier. Doesn't really mean anything. Onama just allowed for everything to happen, in my opinion. He never even attempted to mount a counter offensive. I think that when he goes back and rewatches this fight, he's going to be very disappointed in himself. Garcia, on the other hand, really, the person who was supposed to be his hardest competition to date, he really put on a performance against him. Does what he usually does, walked forward, overwhelmed him, knocked him down, kept hitting him. Like even when he knocked Onama down and Onama tried to get back up, Onama still never even attempted a proper counteroffensive. He just allowed everything to happen. Garcia overwhelmed him and got him out of there as he should have. Congratulations to Steve Garcia, officially solidifying himself as a potential name in featherweight, up and coming that we got our eyes on. Let's see how he continues to proceed going forward. Anyways, guys, that was my recap, review, and breakdown of UFC Fight Night, Garcia versus Onama. Let's see what the future of these divisions got going on in store. Hope y'all all have a lovely and wonderful day. Peace.